Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're going to be talking about a new center called the Center for Championing Nursing in America. And joining me is Quinn, PhD, who is the Director of Advocacy, Director for Advocacy and Consumer Affairs. The center is a joint venture between the AARP, the AARP Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So this really is a collaborative effort, and I appreciate you being here, Winifred.
Oh, Catherine, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having my colleagues and myself here.
So, you know, AARP is a brand that people associate with taking care of older Americans. It's such a well-established, credible brand that most people probably couldn't even tell you what it originally stood for. Because AARP, right?
Right.
I know what it originally stood for, but it's almost 60 years old.
That's right. Our 60th anniversary is next year. And we used to be focused on retired people, but our mission is for people 50 and older. It's not just for retired individuals. So half of our members, we have about 38 million members, and just about half of them are people between the ages of 50 and 64.
So about 10 years ago, you started looking at healthcare in a different way.
That's right.
By first of all looking at who is responsible for the largest chunk of healthcare.
Right. Well, and nurses are those people. So nurses are the biggest sector of the workforce, and they literally work with people more than any other sector. And so we realized that was an important clinical team that we needed to look at in terms of helping AARP reach its mission of having our 38 million members achieve their dreams and goals and dreams and make them into real possibilities. And included in that are issues that families really care about, which includes healthcare. And so, and also part of our DNA at AARP is that as we grow older, people want to stay at home. Right? People don't want to be unnecessarily hospitalized. They don't want to be ending up in nursing homes. They want to stay in their own home or in their own community to get the care that they need. And so one sector that can really help them do that is nurses. And so that's when AARP and the AARP Foundation created this joint initiative with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
And so this too has helped you focus on certified nurse practitioners, as well as APRN, which is advanced practice RNs. In previous shows, people might remember that I spoke with Melissa Batchelor Murphy about what it means to be an APRN.
That's right.
And how certified nurse practitioners are people who can do almost what a doctor does.
Right. So there are so the person that's going to speak after me is Dr. Andrea Brassard, and she is a nurse practitioner, and she can certainly speak to the nuances of how her care could be different than physician care. Nurse practitioners, say in the primary care realm, can provide pretty much almost the same amount of care, or the same type of care that family physicians provide, but it's not necessarily the entire realm that physicians provide.
So the AARP's interest, or this new Center for Championing Nursing in America, is basically looking at nurses practicing, and I love this turn of phrase, to the full extent of their training and education.
That's right, because there are more and more people, as we were talking about before, there are more and more people growing older. The baby boomer generation is retiring. There's a prevalent population here of people 65 and older, and that's just going to grow. There are also more and more people with chronic conditions in the country, and those aren't even people that are growing older. So we have a high prevalence of diabetes and heart disease. So there are many people in need of care. And there are some states, in fact, most of the states, require advanced practice nurses, such as nurse practitioners, to collaborate with or be supervised by physicians. And the studies out there say that that's unnecessary. And from the consumer perspective, it's it really acts as a barrier to care. And so, for example, what often occurs is that the nurse practitioner, by law, needs to have some kind of contractual agreement. So it's either a collaborative agreement or a supervisory agreement. And the physician, in return for that collaboration or supervision, basically just has to check a small amount of the nurse practitioner's clinical records for the month and signs off on them. The physician probably doesn't even know the people whose records he's looking at, or she is looking at. So that ends up being a pretty strange activity that is unnecessary, it acts as a barrier to consumers' access to care, and is frankly very costly.
It is. As a business model, this is not going to work for a lot of certified nurse practitioners who are trying to provide care and can't figure out how to make this model of having to pay $1,000, $2,000 a month for this requirement that's not necessarily truly impacting the quality of care being delivered to their patients.
That's right. There is no difference in quality of care if a physician is supervising or collaborating with a nurse practitioner, or if the nurse practitioner is working to the full extent of their education and training without such contractual work with a physician. So there are 21 states and the District of Columbia that allow APRNs to work to the full extent of their education and training, and there are decades of studies there that show that that quality of care provided to people in those states is just as high as the rest of the country.
One of the things that we were talking about, both of us experienced parents who were very, very ill and had home health care aides, and we were talking about that the continuum of care is not so much a real literal term that describes when you have a parent who's at home, in the hospital, in a rehabilitation facility, back home until the next episode, and how are we helping to keep them at home and well cared for instead of in institutions or the hospital.
Right. So, we talked about it's not a continuum of care. There's nothing linear like that, right? It's very cyclical what occurs for most people, especially as they get older and they have chronic conditions. So, there is a really interesting model of care that different clinicians practice. So it could be a nurse practitioner, it could be a social worker, and sometimes it could be an RN. And this is transitional care. So this is when a person, so say it would have been one of our parents who was admitted to the hospital for something new. And this is a person who's on Medicare and has a certain amount of chronic conditions already. And so the transitional care model is that somebody from the community, a clinician from the community, and a nurse practitioner model is very good with this. Actually goes from the community into the hospital.
Right.
Assesses what's going on with the person, why they're now in the hospital, how does it counteract with what already underlies for that person, and then what's going to happen. Are there new medications that are coming for that person? How would they contradict or counteract with the current medicines that the person is taking? And then assess what does the person need when they leave. Does the person need to have transportation set up to transport them to clinical visits? Does the person need a way for their medication to be delivered, to be ordered and delivered? So very basic activities that most of us take for granted are often what has people on Medicare with chronic conditions back in the hospital or in rehab. And so with this transitional care model, it's been very effective in cutting down those unnecessary hospitalizations. And guess what? People have a better quality of life as a result of that.
It's a win-win, because
Absolutely.
This is something, what you're describing is something that a physician doesn't need to be doing, and a home health care aide cannot provide.
That's right.
So there has to be a team involved,
That's
and
right.
each team member has to play a specific role, because there's some things that you can't do, and physicians obviously cannot be caught up in the things that are required for someone to receive the care they need to be at home.
That's right. So very often a team is the most appropriate way to approach a person who needs care. And sometimes there are different people who claim that they should be the clinical lead of a team. So there are different sectors that try to fight for that. And from the consumer point of view, the consumer should be the lead.
Right.
And the consumer should be saying, this is the kind of care I need. And sometimes it would be a nurse practitioner who should be a clinical leader. I said nurse practitioner. There's also a type of APRN called a clinical nurse specialist. They are really great with chronic care management. And in fact, in that kind of an environment, they very often would be a great leader because they are very well aware of how to help manage a person with multiple chronic conditions and what it is they need in terms of their health and social services that will help support that.
See, and this is what I think people don't understand until you are in a situation where it's a crisis and you've got to manage it as the consumer, as the person managing their own health, or as the child or
Right.
relative of somebody who's trying to manage a condition, and now you're trying to figure all of this out when you're in the middle of the crisis, which is one of the reasons I think it's important for this show to kind of help people understand why you need to care about this now. You
Right.
need to understand the structure and what your options are too before you're in a situation where someone's asking you to sign papers, make decisions, and you don't know what the actual options are.
Yeah. That's a great point. You know, you mentioned it before. I got involved in healthcare policy just about 20 years ago when I was a family caregiver to each of my parents. And it is a very startling and very stressful experience to engage in. It could be. I was also very proud and honored to do that for my parents. But I witnessed a lot of pain that my parents went through because public policies weren't very good about taking care of the people that the public policies were supposed to be made for. So, for example, not enough Medicaid spending in the community to help people like my parents.
Right. They
would have been able to stay in the community longer and have less time spent in rehab or nursing homes. So, and then we need the workforce who are prepared to work in the community too. So. It's all interconnected and
well, and going
harsh.
forward, we're only going to need more of it, not less of it.
That's right.
Because going forward, we have more people who are becoming over 65 at a very rapid rate, and it makes me feel that public policy is not necessarily prepared for this, that the workforce is not necessarily prepared for this, and that we have a lot of work still left to do, and particularly around this one healthcare pillar, which is nursing.
That's right.
So I really appreciate you being on this segment. We're going to come back after the break, and we're going to talk with Andrea Brassard in a little bit more detail. She is an RN, and she's going to help us understand more of this, so please join us after the break.
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, Call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
This is Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we are talking with members of the AARP's new, and it's a joint venture with AARP Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it's the Center to Champion Nursing in America. And joining me in this segment is Andrea Brassard, who is a PhD and an RN with the CCNA. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for having us.
And so you do strategic policy?
Yes, and I'm also a family nurse practitioner.
Yay!
So in my life outside of AARP, to keep my license and my certification, I practice on an occasional weekend in retail health.
That's fantastic.
But I came into nursing. I did a lot of home health care. And part of why I went back to school was I wanted to be able to help my patients to the full extent. I did some home care, I did some hospice, and I wanted to be able to prescribe medications. There's weekends where it's very frustrating. You can't get in touch with a prescriber.
And this is great that you have clinical experience, you still keep your hand in, but you have a PhD, and you're doing strategic policy advising to the center, and to me that is like the melding of all worlds. You are not removed from the people who benefit from what you are recommending.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So shortly after the Center to Champion Nursing in America came into being, well, our original purpose was for the nursing shortage and to try to recruit more faculty into nursing. And then we went into the recession, and nurses didn't retire so fast. And our role shifted. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded a large study called The Future of Nursing, and to see how do we equip our 3.6 million nurses to take care of patients in this evolving healthcare system. And the first recommendation of the Future of Nursing report was that advanced practice nurses, nurse practitioners and others, should practice to the full extent of their education and training.
I love that phrase. Everybody at home needs to remember, to the full extent of their education and training, because why wouldn't they? Right?
And there's some arbitrary state laws which David could talk about from the perspective of Virginia, and there's arbitrary federal laws. It's crazy that nurse practitioners cannot order home health care, cannot order hospice care, and when nurse practitioners work in nursing homes, there's an arbitrary federal regulation that only a physician can do the admission visit, and physicians and nurse practitioners have to alternate visits. Craziness, because Medicare came out in 1965 and there wasn't a lot known about nurse practitioners, and this costs the public. And it makes no sense in a nursing home that nurse practitioners aren't doing the admission physical, doing the monthly visit.
And now you have decades of data.
Right.
Decades of data. So this is not a matter of speculating what the outcome would be. You pretty much know who is doing what, the impacts and the outcomes, and whether they're good or bad or could be better.
And speaking as a nurse, the big advantage in a nursing home when you have a nurse practitioner or a clinical nurse specialist involved is that we were nurses first. So we relate very well to the RNs in the nursing home, to the LPNs and to the aides. And in home care, just this month, published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, a big Medicare study done by a researcher from the University of Virginia and Virginia Commonwealth University showed that nurse practitioners are doing more house calls than physicians.
There you go, right? And the shortage of physicians, too, who want to do internal medicine or general practice or family practice. I mean, most of them are specializing.
Correct.
So what are you supposed to do with a shortage when you don't have a plan? Because the number of consumers are not shrinking.
No.
It's growing.
And most of the work can be done by a nurse practitioner. And we complement, we complement. We have motivational interviewing skills, we have coaching skills, we're communicators, we we're the ones who have spent our time at the bedside, spent our time in the home, and we relate very well to patients, and patients and their families trust us.
Well, trust, because I think there was a survey done not too long ago that said nursing is like one of the top.
Oh, it's the top.
The top, most trusted profession in the country.
It's been the top every year except for 9/11. Then firefighters were number one.
There you go. But that says something right there. The amount of trust that people have in the credibility and the qualifications of nurses, whether they're APRNs or certified nurse practitioners or what, to be able to deliver services to the full extent of their education and training.
You love that phrase.
I love that phrase because it's like, why wouldn't you want people to perform to the absolute limits of what they're able to do?
And at AARP, we feel that way about all healthcare workers, that psychologists, dental assistants, dental hygienists, everyone should, you've learned how to do something. Just because if you became a nurse practitioner in Washington State and you were had full practice authority, and then you moved to California, that doesn't mean you forgot everything.
Right, right, and you're right. Some of these things, because they are state-based, are rather arbitrary. And one of the things that I've talked about in a previous show with Melissa Batchelor Murphy was the fact that rural states understood early on that they didn't have an option.
Right.
Without enough physicians, and in rural areas where you can't get physicians, the only way to deliver health care at all are through the nurses that are there.
Right, and particularly one example of advanced practice registered nurse are the nurse anesthetists. And in rural hospitals, in our critical access hospitals, almost 100% of the anesthesia care is done by a CRNA with safe, wonderful outcomes.
Right, right, and that's what I'm saying about data and the fact that I don't understand why in this day and age where we've collected the data, we've got more data on any subject at any point in human history. Right. We know how to analyze it, we have models for it, why we are not turning to that for the answer. You know, I know that some
states.
I think
it's political.
Do you think it's a matter of political will? Maybe so. And so some states are ahead of other states, aren't they? And I would say that Virginia is not necessarily leading the pack on any of this, though we're trying really hard here. But there's been some recent wins.
We had a recent win in West Virginia. But my state, when I moved to Maryland, we had a 19-page collaborative agreement.
Wow.
And AARP Maryland was able to negotiate, and we got it down to just a one-page attestation statement. And then in 2015, they were able to make it go away.
Wow.
And what we've found in the states that have full practice authority, as more APRNs have migrated into the state, and we have some evidence in states like Nevada that more nurse practitioners are moving to rural areas and are able to open their own practices because they don't have that payment for the collaborative agreement.
You know, and that's actually what put all of this on my radar to begin with a long time ago, because Lori Buchwald, who is a certified nurse practitioner in Radford, Virginia, and she ran for the House of Delegates, actually wrote an op-ed piece for the Roanoke Times because she's in a practice with another nurse practitioner in Radford. It's a rural area, and making the business model work with the collaborating physician, it doesn't really work.
And there's also this arbitrary Medicare regulation that we get only paid 85% of the physician rate. So that's another.
Exactly. And so, if we can't overcome this, how can we allow healthcare providers like Lori and like a lot of other people who've chosen to live in rural parts of the state, how can we help them help more people?
Right.
It seems to me I don't understand a lot of the pushback.
And we have to untie their hands. And physicians don't want to do this unnecessary paperwork. They don't want to countersign orders. They don't want to review charts.
We're putting them in a position, though, where they feel like they're taking on liability they don't want either.
So it's actually safer for the physician, and the OBGYNs and the certified nurse midwives have the model. You carry your own malpractice. You're responsible for your patients. And with the nurse midwives, if the patient needs a surgical intervention, then they refer, and it's the handover. But before that, it's all on the certified nurse midwife.
And it makes sense to do it that way. In fact, I think the Veterans Administration just recently passed a regulation, too, that again allows nurses in 5 critical areas to operate more autonomously.
Right. So what the regulation in the VA is that you're no longer constrained by your state law. So for nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, and clinical nurse specialists, you can practice to your full extent of your education and training, no matter if you're in a very restricted state like Florida or a full practice state like Washington State.
So is that a potential doorway through which we can maybe find a point at which we can make inroads into states like Virginia? You know, the VA is already allowing nurse practitioners to do this.
And military medicine has always done this. So it's like you said, the data's there, the outcomes are excellent. Let's just do it. Let's just see this business model. These regulations are costly. They're human costs. Let's just do it.
And are we going to reach a tipping point? I think I saw the number 16 states have basically come to a point where they don't.
No, 21 states in D.C.
21 states in D.C. So we're almost to the halfway point.
We're almost there.
And I think that's important too, because I think when it gets to a certain point, a sort of a tipping point where you've got more states that have decided this is the better model, it kind of brings the other states along.
That's our hope, and that's been when we've worked with different state offices. We show them the map and we say, you're a state surrounded by independent states. Or you have the Governor Martinez from New Mexico saying, come to New Mexico, we have full practice authority. And there was some migration.
Wow. See, I didn't even think about that because, you know, Virginia is a state, we didn't take Medicaid expansion, but we're surrounded by states who did. You know, Maryland and West Virginia and Kentucky. And so you worry about what does that mean for people who need services and they can't get them here.
Right.
But I never thought about nurses actually migrating to another state, which would be worrisome to me.
Yeah.
That's just another thing that I think we have to worry about.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, going forward, we're going to be talking to David in the next segment about what it is we're actually trying to do in this particular Commonwealth of Virginia to move this issue forward.
Yes.
You know, and I think the more people in the community who understand that this eventually is going to impact all of us, all of us. We may say, well, I don't understand what this has to do with me. Eventually, we'll all understand, right?
That's right.
We're all going to age into needing these services.
And you'll be happy that you have a nurse practitioner house call service that will come to your home and help take care of you.
And be reassured, too, that it's quality care and that there's a history, again, and data that supports the fact that this is a good way, a cost-effective model for delivering care to people where people already are.
Yes.
And that is not putting people in institutions. And I quite frankly don't think that's what any of us want.
No. We'd like to age in place.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you being on the show, Andrea. When we come back, we're going to talk with David DiBiasi about what we're actually doing here in Virginia regarding removing some of these restrictions around nurse practitioners here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So please join me after the break and we will talk to David and dig a little deeper into this issue.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rooftop life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent.
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Tonight we are talking about nursing and healthcare, and we are talking in this segment with David DiBiasi, who is the Associate State Director for AARP Virginia. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
So we were talking with Andrea a little bit about what, you are with AARP. They are with the Center to Champion Nursing in America, right? That's CCNA. And so you are actually with AARP Virginia.
Correct.
So you are down in Richmond. It's session right now. We've got a lot of things going on, but not necessarily any current legislation at this moment in this particular session. So what I want you to explain is what happened in 2012 and why that was important to where we are in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Well, 2012, there was, great pressure to do something about the lack of primary care providers. Because Obamacare was going to be implemented, there was going to be 400 to 600,000 new patients in Virginia that would be insured, and we just didn't have the healthcare workforce to take that on. So governor at the time was Governor McDonald, and he decided that he needed to bring experts together under the leadership of Secretary Hazel to come up with a plan for how we were going to ramp up our system. And they came up with 4 recommendations. By the way, these experts included the Council of Nurse Practitioners, the Nurses Association, AARP Virginia, the Medical Society. And one of their 4 recommendations was, this getting people to be able to practice to the full extent of their education and training.
My favorite phrase.
Right. So the General Assembly was tasked with passing a law that would help, increase the pipeline of primary care practitioners. So the best way to describe the law is to sort of give a case study of what's happened. But as those Andrea and Wynn said before, we needed supervision in Virginia. A physician had to work on site regularly or visit regularly for a nurse practitioner to be able to be in practice. So they got rid of supervision in 2012, which we thought was a huge win. Yeah. It's not needed in other states. It's not needed for them to be able to practice. But what they replaced it with was the need to collaborate and consult. Now, we thought that was also good news because healthcare is a team sport when it's played right.
It is.
But how it actually works out, this little case study I wanted to talk about, it's a nurse who got interviewed recently by one of the larger newspapers in Virginia. Her name is Jennifer Fellman. And she opened up a practice called Metro Healthcare, I think it was. And she delivered home care to hundreds of patients, mostly over the age of 65. When she first came up with the idea, she thought the easiest part of the whole process would be finding a collaborating physician.
Because she'd been practicing for like 11 years, right? 11 years.
Yes. She had been practicing, now at this point it's 11. When she started in 2013, it was 8 years. But she had lots of good relationships with many physicians. So she thought she'd have to ask 2 or 3. Well, she asked 8, and they all said no. They were concerned about the liability of being sued for care that they didn't deliver. So, she eventually found a physician who was willing to sign one of these collaborative agreements, but she's been through 3 physicians in 3 years. So the problem in Virginia is that we mandate nurses collaborate with physicians, or I should say nurse practitioners, but we don't mandate that physicians collaborate with nurse practitioners. So physicians have the upper hand in this equation. The nurse practitioner's authority is the physician. If he doesn't or she doesn't sign a collaborative agreement, they can't go into business. Or they can walk away. They can walk away for any reason, but some legitimate ones. They get ill, they retire, maybe they lose their license to practice medicine, or they just don't want to collaborate anymore. So then someone like Jennifer has to scramble to find
somebody, or she's shut down too.
Yeah, and then her clients, her patients, don't have the person that they love to come to their home and get them well and give them good care. So you can't run a business practice on a whim of somebody else's authority, and that's where the law kind of fell apart. It sounded good, but in practice it's got unintended consequences.
Wow, so going forward, that's not on the table right now to like try to do anything with that this session. But you know, one of the things I think going forward here in the Commonwealth of Virginia is nurses and nursing organizations learning to collaborate to bring greater visibility to this problem that needs to be solved. You know, one of the reasons that I even do this show is that regular, ordinary people who live in a community are touched by a lot of people and things that they're not aware of until they have a problem or they have a need and they can't understand why it's not there or why it doesn't work. And so in doing a show like we're doing tonight, I want people to understand eventually you are going to need services, or your mom's going to need services, or your dad, or you know, your husband's going to need services, and you are going to be scrambling to figure out how you find the quality service, and you don't even understand what the restrictions or the structure are that could prevent. I think Wynn really put it well when she said she is looking at this from the perspective of the consumer.
Right.
And so the consumer doesn't understand how the sausage is made.
Well, there's a real twist to this, because where there are a lack of primary care physicians, rural areas and some medically underserved areas of our larger cities, that's where you need nurse practitioners. But those are the very same places where there aren't physicians
to collaborate.
Yeah.
Right.
To be in these agreements. So as long as you got this agreement in there, nurses are having a hard time going to rural settings. And relative to physicians, nurses are more likely to work with uninsured, with Medicaid patients, in rural settings. I mean, they're sort of the answer to the issue. And if Obamacare, if the Affordable Care Act had expanded, services to another 400,000 people, it would have been in rural areas,
right,
and in medically underserved areas of large cities. So, right where you need the nurse practitioners is where there aren't the physicians in the current system to collaborate with.
And there's still a huge question mark. Everything is so much up in the air with the ACA and what individually is going to happen to states. We had kind of talked a little bit before about what block grants could mean, and it means something different for people who took the Medicaid expansion and accepted that on a statewide versus those of us in like Virginia that did not.
Right. So Virginia has lost out on $2.9 billion in the last 3 years because Medicaid expansion was 100% paid for by the federal government.
Right.
And so by losing out on that money, if we do block grants and we do it based on your current funding formula, we're going to lose. We are the 47th stingiest state in the U.S. for Medicaid. So if you're going to base it on those numbers, we're not going to get much. And in hard times, when more people need Medicaid, the state's going to have to pick it up because it's a 50-50 match. But if you're capped at a block grant, then when the need gets greater, the state ends up picking up more.
What does this mean? They're working on the budget right now. We're almost through crossover, and it's a biennial budget. So things get put in the budget now, and it carries out for 2 years. Well, a lot can happen in 2 years. So then what happens?
Well, not only does it play out for 2 years, but when the next budget is written, it's written by Governor McAuliffe.
For the next governor, whoever it is.
Yeah, Governor McAuliffe's only in for another 30 days. So the next governor has to inherit a budget that he didn't write. So we have, not only can't we not have two-term governors, which would be good to have someone in for 8 years.
And you talk about, we are the last state to only have a one-term governor. We might be the 47th stingiest state, but we are the dead last, absolute last state to only have a one-term governor.
So we have a one-term governor, and we have this odd biennial budget, which the governor only gets 2 years of his term to have his own budget. So there's some definite twists and turns to how we do politics in Virginia that makes it more difficult.
And so, and again, the people in the rural parts of the state are the ones who end up losing out. You and I were talking about the RAM clinic. I've got friends who work at the RAM clinic. There are counties that don't have hospitals at all. And I don't think that necessarily the people who live in those areas or their legislators who are sitting in Richmond right now are understanding the impact when we are putting hurdles and impediments in the way of people already in those areas ready, willing, and able to provide ongoing health services, particularly for those who are chronically ill?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say more. You've
I don't know how to say it a different way. I don't know, can we put it to music? I don't know. Should we write a Broadway musical about healthcare, and maybe it will get enough traction that, people go, well, why didn't we do that? I don't know what to do. I just know that it needs to be addressed. And I don't, once we get through this session and through this budgetary cycle, I think it's an even bigger question mark that is going to take a lot of people by surprise. Something's going to happen. Something's got to happen. Again, you've got me speechless. Something's got to happen. Something's got to happen, and I think I think healthcare is just not something like many other issues that our legislature takes on. Healthcare is not optional. People get it. They'll get it in the emergency room, or they won't get it, and bad things will happen to them. But healthcare is not optional. Human beings need health care.
Right, and so the other sort of pressure is that baby boomers started hitting 65 years of age in 2011, which means they start hitting 80 years of age in 2026. So we have this huge group of people aging, and as they age, they're going to have the complications of aging and need more care. They're going to be sicker and need more care. And so we need to be ramping up for that, if nothing else. And it's not happening at the speed that it probably should.
But this is something that obviously AARP is taking on. This Center for Campaign for Action, this new center, the CCNA. Clearly, there's lots of things. There are 38 million members, 60 years of credibility. Yeah. The AARP clearly has decided that this is a focus.
We are committed to helping people live their best lives, and a part of that is health care. We want people to get safe, affordable, quality care, and that's what nurse practitioners deliver every day. We just need to empower nurse practitioners to be able to work to the full extent of their education and training. With a shortage and increased demand, you got to use all the resources you have intelligently, and so that's the next step.
So, well, it's good to know that we can find you in Richmond, right? Is that where
Yes.
we find you all the time, or just during session?
All the time.
All the time.
Yep.
And so nursing is probably just one of several things that you work on.
Correct.
But you would be a point person for groups around the Commonwealth of Virginia who might want to figure out how to come together in a more cohesive way.
Absolutely.
As a block, because I think when you form coalitions, and I belong to several, when you have the power of many people all singing from the same sheet of music, with the same call to action, that everybody understands what it is that they're asking for.
Absolutely.
It's a great benefit. Well, can't thank you enough for being on the show, David. I really appreciate it. We have a lot of major problems to solve here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but at least we're optimistic going forward that we can do something about them. Please join me after the break. We are going to bring Winifred Quinn back on to talk a little bit more about what the future looks like for nursing here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Osama bin Laden calls getting nuclear weapons a religious duty.
Today, materials that can be used to make nuclear weapons are stored in more than 40 countries.
Sometimes protected by just a chain-link fence.
Yet not enough is being done to lock down these materials
before terrorists steal them.
Why did we learn all this?
My mother.
My son.
My sister-in-law.
Were all murdered September 11th.
Help protect America.
Together we can.
Please join us.
The stem cell issue is being debated throughout the country. Truth is, most everyone has an opinion, even if they don't know the facts.
Let's stop arguing and start really understanding the potential of stem cell research.
For us and for millions of Americans living with disabilities, get the facts.
Call 1-877-842-3442 for free information from the Stem Cell Research Foundation. That's 1-877-842-3442.
Following the tragic events of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for.
Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember
what that flag you're waving stands for.
One nation under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty
and justice
for all.
In America, there's either room for everyone or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
Planning a home renovation? Put this at the top of your to-do list. Because after 10 years, none of you are protected against tetanus and another potentially fatal disease, diphtheria. A minor injury, such as a cut or a scrape, can put you at risk for a tetanus infection. And while safety gear offers some protection, an up-to-date vaccination called the TD booster is the best insurance against tetanus. So get the TD booster. If it's been 10, do it again.
Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. We are talking tonight about nursing and the AARP's new Center for Championing Nursing in America in collaboration with the AARP Foundation and with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Joining me here in the last segment is Winifred Quinn, PhD, who is going to help us kind of wrap up and talk about some of the things that we need to elaborate on. To start with baby boomers. I mean, David left us with a very tantalizing, they started in 2011 and they're going to turn 80 in 2026.
I know, that was pretty, I hadn't thought of that statistic
You know, my visual on that was like a rat going through a snake. You know, can you imagine like this blob and it's like this linear thing, but there's this clump in the middle and it's just moving its way along. And I'm like, it wasn't kind of a happy thought.
No, but I'll give you a happy thought about baby boomers who are aging. You know, baby boomers really are excellent consumers. They drive demand. They and they know what they want. And this issue of advanced practice nurses practicing to the full extent of their education and training is as important to them as other consumer-based issues. So it will be interesting to see what continues to occur. There's a lot of momentum. If we have the map up, if we put the map up,
sure.
I wanted to.
We'll put the map up that shows the United States and kind of where we are.
So, so the campaign for action that Andrea described, that started as a result of the Institute of Medicine's Future of Nursing report. Prior to the campaign, it took 40 years for 14 states to modernize their scope of practice laws. In the first 6 years of this campaign for action, 8 states have fully modernized. Another 10 states have significantly modernized. And
that sounds like momentum to me.
That's a lot of momentum. And so I'm hoping, you asked David before, is there a tipping point? I'm hoping that we're reaching that tipping point if we haven't done so yet. And so for the campaign for action, if we could go back to the map, with the campaign for action, we emphasize a lot to the action coalitions. We have an action coalition in every state and in DC, and these are comprised primarily of nurses from both education and practice. They are working very, very closely together, especially on education issues. But there's a sector normally within the Action Coalition. Sometimes it's led by the State Nurses Association, somebody who's savvy to advocacy and knows what they're doing. And so we've been working with the nursing leaders in those states to work with people outside of the normal coalitions that they've had before. And so there's been the natural fit of working with AARP state offices, and David described what he did in 2012 and continues to do with nurses. And so we have many nurses and state offices working together in the states, and that's something I'm really proud of. And then we also have different sectors such as insurers, retail clinics have weighed in on this issue. And I'm happy to say that an interesting coalition member that's popped up in the last couple of years is Americans for Prosperity. Very unusual for nurses and Americans for Prosperity to work together, but Americans for Prosperity is a relatively new organization anyway. And 2 years ago, Americans for Prosperity weighed in on the Nebraska scope of practice law, and last year they weighed in on the West Virginia law. And it was because of their input in both of those states that really got it over the finish line and was able to pass those laws. And their reasoning is that the state laws that say that nurses must have contractual agreements with physicians is an overreach of government. And not only is it an overreach of government, it reduces competition in the free trade. So it is really a great argument. And so here's this synergy between consumers' access to care, baby boomers demanding access and choice, and then you have a more conservative-leaning organization that's saying, yeah, we're right there with you, because
and I think that's important. Issue. I think that's really important for a number of issues. First of all, healthcare should not be a partisan issue.
That's right.
It should not be. And I know that part of your mission statement is that your organization is nonpartisan.
That's right.
As it should be, because these issues affect everybody. It doesn't matter what flag you fly or what color of your hair or whatever. It's like people, human beings, require healthcare, and it has to be delivered in some way. And there must be policy around the delivery and management of quality health care.
Absolutely.
So I'm thrilled that Americans for Prosperity. I'd like to see a lot more organizations find their voice in this.
Right. Well, the Heritage Foundation had a fellow, she was with them about 4 years ago, and she wrote she's a nurse, and she wrote their position paper. So this is the Heritage Foundation, one of the biggest leaders in conservative think tanks, and they have a position paper about scope of practice, and that it is just how Americans for Prosperity view it. When APRNs are restricted from practicing to the full extent of their education and training, it's an overreach of government, and it reduces competition in the commercial environment.
Well, I have to tell you, just from my perspective, Virginia is a conservative state on so many fronts, and you'd think that this message would be one that they might embrace. Maybe
1-800-Americans for Prosperity.
There you go. Get people in here explaining to our delegates and senators why we need to address this issue. And I think you're also right that people coming into their post-65 years are savvy consumers.
That's right.
So the important thing is we need to put this particular specific issue on their radar, because the time that you need to know about it is not when you are in a hospital bed trying to figure out what your next move is.
Right. And you know what? It's also important to family caregivers. And family caregivers are those who are family members, could be a spouse, could be an adult child, a niece or a nephew. It could be friends, and it could be neighbors, right? That's who AARP terms as family caregivers. And, family caregivers provide more than I'm going to get my statistic wrong, but it's an enormous amount of care that they provide to Americans every year, and it goes unpaid.
Right.
And they are the backbone of care provided, especially to people in their own home. And they need the support of advanced practice nurses and physicians. We all need as many clinicians as possible to be working hands-on with people, whether it's the patient that needs the care or their family caregiver that's supporting them. And family caregivers, the average age is 48, and a lot of our members, like I said before, half of our members are people between the ages of 50 and 64, and a lot of them are family caregivers. So, and typically, family caregivers are viewed upon as women who are caring for their children and their loved one. We are seeing more and more of a prevalence of male family caregivers. And right now, AARP is starting to work with the American Association of Men in Nursing to intersect with what is it that men need, male family caregivers need to take care of their loved ones. My father was my mother's primary caregiver, and he took fabulous care of my mother. He ended up becoming ill as a result because it was so exhausting. So for somebody like my dad and men like him to be able to get that care would be enormous. And it would also take a lot of stress off of women who have been carrying the load for generations.
And these are all things that we need. This is the reality that we're in. It's just, like I said, most people don't necessarily understand where we are unless they've been affected or touched by it themselves.
Right.
But it's coming.
It is coming. That's right.
2026, and we're like, well, it's only 2017. Well, 2026 is 10 years away.
That's right. Everyone in America I can't imagine not one single American who would never be a family caregiver.
Right.
Right? If you're not a family caregiver now, you have been, or you will be, or both. Right? I was a family caregiver to each of my parents. Chances are I'll be taking care of another loved one at some point too.
Right.
So everybody has a vested interest to figure out what we can do to make sure that all healthcare providers out there are taking care of people and not paperwork, unnecessary paperwork.
That is true. And paperwork, my husband will tell you, I'm allergic to paperwork. Forms, my sister, when my mother was ill, had a 3-ring binder. I mean, God bless her. If my sister wasn't there doing that, and my brother and I did our best, but, it's a lot to manage.
It is.
This is 2007. This is 10 years ago now. It was a lot to manage. And on top of everything else we were trying to do, it was overwhelming. And that is not... In this day and age where we use apps and technology and we have data and science and it's instant everything, and we should be doing better. I don't understand why we're not doing better.
Well, there's a lot of culture that's entrenched. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of history. But we have a lot of disruption going on now in government, and I think we have a lot of opportunity to take advantage of that.
Well, I'm glad to see, again, that AARP, to have this center to champion nursing in America, that really makes a statement about how important you think this particular aspect of healthcare is. And I think the very fact that you've put resources and money and time and people at this issue needs to say something to your membership, all 38 million of them, about how they need to be paying attention to this. We need to, in each state.
I don't know if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures yet.
Yes, I have. It's a wonderful movie.
Well, I believe that just like the African American women scientists at NASA, nurses are often the clinicians in the healthcare environment that do most of the work and hardly are recognized for it. And I was able to see, as a family caregiver, how much they are engaged in a person's health and well-being, including the family caregiver. And so I, as a consumer, am so proud to champion nurses and to bring them out into the spotlight and show the world, show the country how important they are to everyone's health and well-being every day.
Right, and for the most trusted profession in this country, they should be allowed to practice to the full scope of their training and education training, which is now my favorite phrase, because every person should want every professional that they are dealing with to be doing the maximum that they are able to do. And you are right about us being savvy consumers, demanding consumers, and when we touch healthcare, however we touch healthcare, we should fully expect that we are being presented with certified nurse practitioners who are doing what they were trained and educated to do.
Absolutely.
Well, I so appreciate you being here.
Thank you
Winifred.
so much.
This is great, and I just want to mention too that on February 27th, Melissa Batchelor Murphy will be airing her first show on healthcare here on Inside Scoop, and she'll have a monthly show every month through the end of the year. And I hope that again helps to highlight these issues and some of the wonderful nurses and other healthcare providers who work in this industry.
Yeah, that will be a great show. Melissa's awesome.